If there's one consistent thing on my channel, it's probably the fact that I hate reviews for no apparent reason. I do pretty much the same thing in my wrap-ups and my vlogs all the time. And today, when I was looking at my vlog footage, I was like, wow, I pretty much explained most of my feelings, except for the spoilers, on Kazuo Ishigo's Klara and the Sun. And yeah, maybe I should take that footage and make it into a review. So I'll add some thoughts, and I will go a little bit into more specifics in the end, and I will have spoilers as I always do. So my first part will be spoiler free, and then I will change the spoilers near the end. But pretty much this is the 2021 release of Kazuo Ishiguro, who is a Nobel laureate, whatever you call them. He won the Nobel Prize. He's a big deal. He has published many ones. He's Japanese and British, and that's his life. So it's set in like a near future, but we're not shown how we get there. We're not even shown a lot about the actual world. We know that they have AFs, which is artificial friends / AIs made for children to not be lonely. And we have the thing where like, it's not even introduced, the fact that they're like lifted, which is like they have their ability to change their bodies and also their bodies and also their minds. They're more intelligent. But there's also some scenes where it's like, you know, the first scene she's talking to the manager, which I also love. Like, people weren't called, so like when they talk to, they call them like the child and they're adult. They refer to like the main character human is Josie, and she refers to Josie in third person when she's still talking to them. So she'll be like, yeah, Josie is doing this while talking to Josie, and she'll refer to them as adult and mother, and like, but not mother, like the mother. And I liked that style choice. It made it very unique while also not being like too like tropey in the way that an alien would talk. And because she still has a lot of emotions and she still has sentiments throughout. Yeah, so there's a moment where she calls the manager just manager, and manager is like talking to her at the end of the day and all of that stuff, and then it's like, and then she took her head off and then her arms, and I was like, what? Like, and then she walks into another room at the time and they were like, and these people had their 3 heads over there, and I was like, what? I was like, we never got fully explained why their body parts can separate. And I was like, some people were just like, yes, they were intellectually engineered. And I was like, did you miss the part where they said that all their heads were together on their couch when their bodies were over there? Like, people just didn't talk about that. So there's 6 parts, and the like part 5 and 6 are quite short, but part 4 kind of disappointed me. The naivety of Klara a little bit got on my nerves, but it is definitely a story that is focused on themes and focused on just like feeling the feelings. I don't know, because it's not like completely emotional. Like, it is a little dry in its emotion, but it also is very introspective and very beautiful, and I liked the fact that it doesn't actually give away the answers. I thought the ending was very interesting. It kind of jumps a little bit forward and is very sad, but again, because we're looking at it through Klara's mind, who isn't able to fully grasp everything that's happening, it doesn't, she's not as sad as it is, so it's interesting. I still really liked it. It was a book that I would be intrigued to read again, and to read more of his books, because I like his style. It's not completely my style, but I definitely appreciate it. One of the things I knew to expect going into this book was that it was going to be slow. That is the thing that killed me about The Buried Giant, was that it was so slow and so meandering, and I never really got the point. And I do think that that's something that I had to know going into this book and that I appreciate a lot more. But one thing that I thought about was, is Klara going to spend the whole time in the shop? Because she probably spends the first hour and a half, hour and 20 minutes out of an 8-hour audiobook, which is how I listened to it in the shop. And I was like, you know, I would enjoy this whole book if she just spent her whole time going between the window where she has sun, going into the different things, observing the people, thinking about it, and kind of interacting with the different AFs. I would find that really, really interesting. So I really enjoyed that. And then I was interested in how the story was going to progress. There wasn't a plot, but there was definitely more things happening in the later half than this. As I said, I really liked the writing style. I really liked the way that it was both dry and emotional, both introspective and also naive. And I thought that he just did such a great job of exploring themes. And I also love that he never explained things. Like, we just kind of show up in this world with no explanation. And because, you know, she's a child of this world, there's no reflection on what it is. And we don't even get a lot of reflection on what kind of world it is for humans. And I think Katie from Books of Things said that in her review, that like, you know, it's kind of a story of other people. Like, Klara isn't really the main character. Like, she is the main character, but the things that are happening to Josie and Klara and to other characters around her. I just said Klara. Her world is changing and she is being exposed to different things. She gets to explore being outside. She gets to explore different facets of human society, but she mostly is observing the world of other humans. And one of the things that I thought was interesting on the divide between humans and AIs is the fact that we had people who treated them mostly as people. Like, they apologized for them, and we do have some understanding that, like, you know, some people, you know, make their AF like go behind them and make them like not really interact as a human. And like we have that one scene where she is treated really terribly by some other characters, but throughout the time the family mostly refers to and treats her as a human. So it's very interesting then they have these casual things when they're like, yeah, no, you won't have to sleep in the closet, or you know, like there'll be room, we won't put you in the trunk. And it's like these things where it's like just casually treated like, yeah, you know, you're a machine, but you're also a human. And I think that would be very interesting to explore, because so often I see AI stories being focused on like the awakening of the AI and how they, you know, take dominance or they interact or are they human. And I haven't watched or read many of those things because it's not a genre that I'm very interested in. But it was very cool to see a world in which they were already very established. They were already very set up. So like the way that people interacted them, both flippantly as a human and flippantly not as a human, was very interesting. And another thing that I thought about a lot was, it's kind of a throwaway line, is when, you know, we have Rick starting speaking in a British accent, him and his mom, Miss Helena, and the fact that they are British and that the rest of the people speak in an American accent, or, you know, a non-accent, as some people like to say. Although, you know, Americans do have an accent. They speak English in a different way than many other people who speak English. It was very interesting for me to have, you know, the character being talked about the fact that they're speaking a British accent. We don't really know where it's set in. I don't think that any of the landmarks are real. So whether it's taking place in, you know, America or in Britain or in another country entirely, we don't really know. But the fact that they're remarking on it makes me think that like people who are lifted don't have accents. It's not like you're from England, it's that you speak in an English accent, which is very interesting. Or maybe they are in Britain and they have all been like reformed to be American because America has become, you know, the place of the most money and influence. It's just very interesting to have that reflection in a book written by a British author. So now I'm going to be talking about spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, go away, my children, and come back. And I liked the book, I enjoyed the book. It's still not a book that I would put my whole love behind, but I'm very interested to reread it one day, and I'm very interested to read more of Kazuo Ishiguro's work, because I think that he is a really brilliant novelist who has a very unique taste and way that he writes, and that he writes so fiercefully, that's a wrong word. I was gonna say flawlessly, that's the wrong word too, but like very just straightforward. He knows the kind of thing that he wants to write for, and he writes, and it was great. And I watched a lot of like interviews with him and how much he cares about this and how much he cares about science fiction and how this started as a children's book and then he transformed it. So I'm very interested to learn more about him as a man as well. The first thing in spoilers that I want to talk about is Josie and her disability. This isn't a spoiler because we kind of know from the moment that we begin that she is walking with a little bit of a limp, or she walks slightly different. I thought it a very interesting choice, and maybe a little bit more into his world building, that he never told us what disability was. I paid, you know, laser attention to it because I'm someone who has a disability as well, and one that isn't very predictable in the way that it acts. So it did feel a little bit like representation, which was very interesting to have her and to kind of like examine what her life was like and the fact that we were never told. I was wondering if, you know, her disability comes from the fact that she's lifted, or like I thought part of the way through that her sister was going to have like, in this world that, you know, to be lifted you're kind of being taking someone else's body, so like that her sister was kind of taken in and that her sister's body was fused with her. So like the fact that, you know, that's why they thought that there was a little bit of her. Someone said that she wasn't lifted in a review I listened. I'm pretty sure they were wrong. I'm like, I don't think there's ever a moment where they talk about her body coming apart or something like that, but she's friends with all the lifted people. So, and she's going to a lifted school and Rick isn't. So like she is lifted, right? And that is why she got sick. Did she get sick because of the lifted program? I think that that is kind of what it is. It's very interesting. And I do like the light science because like I don't care that much about science. So I'm interested in the fact that he, you know, took this from a place of science, but it wasn't very science heavy. I thought her fascination with the sun was very interesting. To look at the sun as a deity, to look at the sun as something that gives life and something that gives joy. I don't know how I feel about the end. Like I don't love it. I like the end where Rick and Josie end up not falling in love, which my kind of understanding is that like, you know, almost that she bartered away their love, which would be interesting. But I don't know how I feel about it. I like the idea that she looks at the sun as something restorative because it is for her, so why wouldn't it be for humans? And I don't know, maybe it's the whole magical cure of disability that's getting me the wrong way, because I was like hoping, like I love the representation of disability, of chronic illness. That makes me very happy to see. So maybe it's part of my own feelings projecting like the, you know, inability of my own health to heal that gets me down. But like, I don't know, I love the idea of her dying, but also I do like the end result of her getting better, even if I don't love the choice of her getting better. And we also can talk about, you know, the idea that she was going to take over for Josie. I am kind of terrified of that. Like I find that very interesting. Not even in like a robot, you know, having her body, but the fact that she has to pretend to be her friend and that her mother is trying to replace her. Like, that's the part that I find psychologically interesting, very interesting. And this is a book I would have almost loved like a multiple choice kind of answer where we see all of these different places, because like I like the way that the book turned out, but I would have found it very fascinating to read alternative stories. Like, almost every turn, both ends were interesting. And I think that Kazuo Ishiguro does such a good job of showing us different avenues that we're both happy with, where like he'll make a promise to do this, but he'll do something else and it will still be, you know, fun and great and wonderful. And yeah, I really enjoyed seeing that, and like chills at the idea that like, you know, she's literally just going to become Josie. And like, I don't know if Klara would be able to do it. Like, she would be able to, you know, copy her movements and her speech patterns, but like incorporating another person, that is a very interesting concept. If you have book recommendations that does that, like I feel like I would be terrified. But also there's Scapegoat by Daphne du Maurier, which is like a kind of magical old book that deals with that. But yeah, no, that's an interesting avenue to explore. And also where we have transformation and how the mother was okay with this and the father isn't. We have other characters like Miss Helena, which I found very interesting, and how her views, and I don't know, I find her involvement a little puzzling, but also interesting at the same time. And also that she is Miss Helena, the fact that she's called by her name. I think that she's really the only adult in the book that is referred to by a name. And it is interesting to see how Klara takes on the ways that people introduce themselves. Like, in most cases, she interacts with people as they are to the child that she looks after, or if they're another child, then she refers to them by their name. To have Miss Helena called that is a very interesting way to perceive the world. And I don't know everything with like the colleges and stuff like that, if it was just supposed to explore the world, it was just to explore, you know, Rick and his world and why the things happen. I would have loved to place it because it felt both modern, especially with the arguments of the parents and the divorce and stuff like that, but it also found like very mid-century or maybe just British. I don't know. It, to the view of him getting his car and moving on and all of that. And also they seemed quite younger than they were, like they were 15 and 14 throughout the novel, which is interesting, but they also kind of seemed older. I found Josie and Rick very interesting. Childhood romances is something that I really, really love. I love friends to lovers, and I like the idea that, I don't know if they were ever romantic. It never gave me super romantic things, but it did give me firm friendship, which I enjoyed. And I also enjoy stories where characters move apart. That is something that I really love, and I would have loved to explore it more, but it also makes sense why Klara wasn't as invested in it. I do wish we had spent a little bit more time with it, but I liked the focus on it. I do wonder if the son took away their romance as a way, but I also like the idea that it's just a natural progression. Stories that end that way always really, really transfix me. There is some question about, did the end actually happen? Did the bargain with the son actually happen, or is that kind of Klara resorting her memory into something that is more like plausible? Or that if it's something that Klara is imagining in order to be more digestible. I do find it interesting that when Josie stops being sick, that Klara goes from being a friend to being a machine more, like the fact that she's starting to sleep in the closet, but also that Josie still cleans it out so that she can see the sun, that she can see the outside, that she can see the world. That we don't really see the moment where she goes from living in the house to living in the junkyard. I found that very interesting, and the idea that she's still living in sentience is it the fact that she's older now, like she would probably be like 4 or 5 years old because of, you know, I'm assuming she went away at about 18, 19, and that they kind of know the idea that they get older and they turn off? Or is it because of the fact that when your child doesn't need you anymore, they kind of lose their reason of living? Is it that? I'm not sure, because you have the people that are younger than her in the junkyard. So is it a child thing, or is it is it a memory thing? Is like the idea that the memory and the friendship is keeping you alive, which is why she becomes more and more quiet? Is it because she lost some of the fluid in her brain? Or is it just because, you know, models only last for about 5 years and that's about the time that you have? I find those questions very interesting. I found the conversation with Rick very interesting in the end, where he talks about the love and it goes the separate ways, and that always makes me really happy. I found it interesting that once the mother found out that Klara wasn't going to be Josie, that she kind of stopped interacting with her as friendly. Like, one of the scenes that still haunts me is the waterfall scene, like where she's just like, yeah, like I'm gonna bring Klara, and it's like so strange and unnerving and awkward, even more so than the moment when she makes her enact Josie. I think that's kind of like an interesting scene that we get to see it. It could lead to something, but because we never actually saw that in reality, we see it in partial. I do think that this is a novel of questions more than it is of plot or characters. I do really like the characters, but I do think that I'll remember the instances and the way that we can ask questions, even more than themes maybe. Because the themes are interesting, but the world and the questions and the way things turn out, the way that life turns out, questions, like I would love to read this with like a book study or like have a discussion about it and just like really sit down and like talk about all the ways that it could. So if anyone wants to do that, please hit me up, because yeah, I want to read more of his books. I like these books because I feel like the more that I read, the less thrilling plots do it for me, and the more that I just want to think about the nature of books, the nature of things, and the nature of things. Like, I'm such a pretentious fool, and I'm totally okay with that. Anyways, did you like this book? Did you not? Are you planning on reading it? And all of those things, get back to me and put a sun in the comments, because obviously it's sun, Klara, and the sun. You can put a robot too. There's probably a robot sun, like a robot and a sun. So editing me is thinking about the fact that he talked about he first shared this with his daughter, and his daughter was like, this is too dark, you can't make this a kid's book. And the fact that he was thinking about kids when it was doing this. Is this all a metaphor for like empty nesting and also losing like your family? Because like first they lose one kid and they're like terrified about losing another child. So they're like, we're gonna do everything to keep this child from growing. And it's like about the loss of childhood and the loss of like memory. Because isn't that what Never Let Me Go is also about? It's about like the loss of like friendship and looking back at youth. But this isn't looking back at youth, it's looking back at fatherhood. It's looking back when your children were young. Because I think that's a 90s book, so it makes sense. He's 40s then and he's in his 60s now, and his child is like in her like late 20s and she just published her own book. So it makes sense that he would be thinking about empty nesting and he'd be thinking about what it means to let a child go. Because that's pretty much what it is. Like he's left almost like a woman who has like memory loss, who has amnesia, who's trying to reconstruct her life, and she can only remember very clearly what happens at the beginning, but she can't remember what clearly happens in the end. This makes so much sense. Like there's obviously different interpretations because this is an interpretive work, but like I really, really like that idea. I like the idea that you can think about this as like an old woman thinking about her life and thinking about this friend, and you know, as her children grow. It's almost even like if you view it as a marriage, well, like a lot of marriages break up because you spend so much time focusing on the children that when the children leave, it can become more difficult, but you can't find new memories. So that's why she's fading. She's fading because she doesn't have a child anymore. She's fading because she's old and she doesn't have memory and she's trying to reconstruct. And she's looking at the manager who represents her own mother, who's like happy about it going, and that like different people came. I also think the empathy is interesting, and about the B12s, B13s, whatever they're called, and about them having more compassion, and about us becoming older and like losing compassion. Is that a representation? I don't know. There are so many themes. I couldn't find like a theme analysis. It was just my favorite thing about reading literary and classic novels, is like looking at things about themes. But this is my fan theory now. Let me know. I find it very interesting.